right. Geez, elevation sensation. I was thinking this discourse, Larry, between the Kings fans and the Warriors fans, a consternation sensation. We could come up with all kinds of nicknames, but it's gotten kind of hot. And so how about if we this is perfect. Do you even know this, Tim Roye? You're the perfect guest today. You know all about this. You know both organizations. You're right here in the middle of this. How, as these two teams kind of come together in the playoffs for the very first time, how would you characterize the way the two fan bases have interacted this week?
It's getting a little spicy because it's really brand new for the two respective fan bases. When the Kings were really good in the early 2000s, the Warriors weren't very good. Now the Warriors have been great for the last 8 years for the most part, and the Kings have gone through this incredible drought. So I think it's the start of a rivalry it's always been kind of simmering there beneath the surface, but it never really had a chance to flourish because the teams weren't good at the same time. They haven't played big games against each other. And so this is the start of it, I think, which is kind of cool. I think it's nice to, we have too many, very pleasant meetings in professional sports. I like it when it gets a little spicy.
Tim, good to talk to you. And what was your run first year in SAC? What was your first year in SAC, and what was your first year with Golden State?
89 to 95 with the Kings, and my first year with the Warriors was 95-96. So.
You have seen a lot of incredible basketball in the last, and we all have seen a lot of incredible basketball, but we also, us long-standing Warrior fans, have seen some rough basketball. I was trying to put my finger on we can point to a lot of these championship years as the high point, but the low point is hard to identify. Is there one moment or one trade or one sequence that you can think of and say, man, looking back on it, that was the low point for Golden State?
Well, I think one of the low points, I'm in my car, so I can't really tell you which year, but it was either 01-02 or 00-01, and the Warriors won 17 games. And if you look at this game by game, they went, I think, 1-31 in their last 32 games. They won one game after the All-Star break. And that was, to me, was probably the low point because you just thought, okay, they were right in the middle of 5 years where they didn't win more than maybe, I think, 21, 23 games. And so that, to me, was the real bottom out, at least in my tenure, because it just seemed like you were spinning wheels and that this was just going to keep going and going and going, and that there was no end in sight and no reason for a great deal of hope in the future. That was a very, very tough second half of the season.
Tim Roye is with us here on Willard and Dibs. Larry in for Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Of course, the voice of the Dubs here on 95.7 The Game. Hey, Tim, I asked this, and I'm not fishing for some sort of denigration of the Kings season at all, but I wonder your true perspective and how they stack up against what we normally think of as the 3 seed. The 3 seed is normally a 50 to 55 win team. Is this team up to that level?
Well, it is in this sense. It's a year where balance has just been all over the Western Conference. I mean, there's from team 11 to team 4, there really wasn't much of a difference between those teams this year. And so I think they've earned the number 3 seed. They were better. They're the best road team in the Western Conference. And so you have to take that into account. So they are a 3 seed. But this year it's so balanced. There's not that gap between 1-8 and 2-7 and 3-6. There's really a small gap this year between the teams at the top and the teams at the bottom of the conference. And I think the first round of the playoffs in the West are going to be really incredible. I think in the East, it's a little bit more traditional that way. I think 1, 2, and 3 are clearly better than 8, 7, and 6. So I think everybody should hold serve there. But in the West, all bets are off. I mean, you could easily see 7 beat 2. Not so sure about 8-1, but certainly it's not going to be a walkover type series.
Tim, the Warriors this year, 114.4 defensive rating. It was 17th in the NBA. But since GP2 has hit the floor, they're a phenomenal defensive team. What's real? Will they continue to be this dominant defensive team that they've been since GP2 came back? Or is the team that we saw much of the year more likely to kind of resurface in the playoffs?
I think you're going to see a better defensive team because they've got Gary Payton II back, and now you're going to get Wiggins back. And what does that mean? Now you've got multiple players who can guard wings. DiVincenzo can guard wings. Wiggins can guard wings. We know GP2 can guard wings. Clay can guard wings, especially some of the bigger guys. He's been very, very adept at that this year. Kuminga is a better defender now. So I think they're kind of hitting their defensive stride. I think you had a lot of, moving parts, and for whatever reason, they just couldn't dial it in on the road this year defensively. But I think now in the playoffs, I think there'll be a much better focus for them. And like I said, I think they're getting healthy and all the right people in the right spots at the right time of the year.
So, Tim, I wonder about that. Like Wiggins coming back, we can say the obvious things about the talent on both ends of the floor that's wonderful to have back. But how would you describe the challenge of sort of re-entering him into the rotation and what that means for other players? How difficult will that be?
I think in this case it won't be as difficult as in the past because if you look at, everybody from Poole, Kuminga to Gary Payton II has played with Wiggins. Okay, they understand who he is, where he is, where they need to get him the ball. Maybe, for a guy like Dante, it might affect his minutes a little bit because Gary Payton II's around too. So the minutes will be a little bit different, but I really think I don't think it's going to be as big an issue just because there's so much continuity, in what's going to be their playoff rotation.
What do you view as the number one concern going into Game 1?
Wow, number one concern, Game 1. I would say that their defensive transition had better be on point because Sacramento, as we saw in some of the games that they played against the Warriors this year, they don't care if it's a made basket. They're taking the ball out of the basket and they're going. So I think their defensive transition's got to be on point. I think they have to find a way in the half court to try to disrupt the handoff game that Sabonis is really, really good at. And, whether it be with Fox, with Herter, with whomever. And then I think on the other end, I think the Warriors just need to not be overly sloppy with the ball because Sacramento is not a great defensive team. They're okay, but I think the Warriors can take advantage of that. And if they don't have those, unforced errors, we all know what they look like. That, offhand, cross-court, off-the-dribble pass that never seems to get on target. If they can keep those to a dull roar, I think they're going to give themselves a much better chance of winning.
Tim, help me with something here because you've watched every minute for all of these years, this whole thing. And I want to know if we're being irrationally loyal. In other words, are we ignoring something that's right in front of us? You just mentioned they were never able to dial it up on the road, and whatever they do in these playoffs, it's going to have to be on the road. Why should a Warrior fan rationally believe that they will suddenly be good on the road when they never were this year?
Well, let's go back a year. Maybe this will help you. Go back a year. What was the narrative going into the playoffs last year? Steph Curry's coming back. He's going to start coming off the bench. And the Warriors haven't been this dominant defensive team in the second half of the year, in part because Draymond, remember, missed a bunch of time. He had that back issue that was causing his calf to tighten up. And so, the Warriors aren't as great defensively. And what happened in the playoffs? They kind of locked it in. They got to where they needed to be. And so I think that to me, if I'm a Warrior fan, that's what I'm looking at. Last year they were able to overcome a second half of the season where they weren't great, and their defense was not nearly as good as it was early, but they got it going at the right time. And again, the other part about it is that having gone through these championship series, they have belief. They know they can do this if they can stay healthy and focus on the task at hand. So I think, there are a whole bunch of teams in the playoffs right now that are hoping that they can do it, but they really don't know that they can do it. And that's a big difference when you have that belief that you've been through this before.
I'm always love watching Draymond Green this time of year. I was just looking at his career stats. I mean, in the playoffs, he's averaged 11.8, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists, which are better than his regular season stats. What level do you see that he gets to, and what's the impact? Because you can feel the will, Tim, coming through the TV screen when you're watching him in the playoffs. He just gets to another level, and he finds a way to he's ferocious, and he gets a way to the rest of the team elevates with him at times.
Yeah, he's probably one of the top competitors that I've ever seen, in any sport. He's able to, look at a situation and he just says, no, they're not going to score on me. We're not going to give this up. And so that to me, it's his will to take a team on his back and say, hey, we're gonna play a better defensive or so. And so but he's able to do it. He does it at a very high level, and he does it consistent basis. And when you add in the intelligence factor, that's when he becomes, the future Hall of Famer, I think.
You're listening to 95.7 The Game, KGMZ FM and HD1 San Francisco, always live on Twitch, YouTube, and the free Odyssey app. Larry Kruger is in for Dibs. It's Willard and Dibs, and we're hanging with the voice of the Dubs, the great Tim Roye, right here on 95.7 The Game. Okay, Tim, the environment in both arenas, what do you expect, and how do you expect each road team to be affected by it?
I think it's going to be huge. I think both arenas will be very, very, very loud. I mean, Sacramento's going to be loud. They haven't had a playoff game there in over a decade and a half. They're going to be fired up for that. But I think I'm curious to see, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm curious to see, what will the proximity of the two franchises mean to the home court advantage. And by that, I mean, will the audience be mixed, tomorrow night? Will it be mixed when the Warriors play Game 3 at Chase Center? In the past, when the Kings were good, they brought a lot of fans down to the Bay Area. So I'm kind of curious to see just how the fact that you can drive to both games and fans can go. They don't even have to, if they don't want, get a hotel room. They can go drive in, drive back. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the buildings with that. Either way, I think they're going to be loud. But whether they're going to be loud and partisan loud, that's a little bit different. And I think if you haven't played in that kind of an environment where every possession means something and things get a little tighter and you can tell certain players don't want the ball because they don't want to shoot it in a clutch situation. So I'm curious to see if the Warriors' experience factor handling that kind of pressure, that kind of noise will help them in this series.
I expect the place, to Golden One to just be rocking, right? Because, they haven't had this in a long time, and I would imagine they're going to bring all kinds of energy. But I'm kind of wondering if that works in the Warriors' favor, just the way Golden State and Steph specifically played in Boston when that crowd was absolutely unhinged. I almost feel like at this point that may go in the Warriors' favor. It's almost like it challenges them to kind of get it to another level. You're right there watching it. What do you think?
I think you're right. I think there's nothing that Steph likes better than to silence a crowd, and we know that Draymond likes to, play with a crowd and use their emotions against them. So, expect Draymond to be at his usual Draymond self I think that's an advantage for the Warriors because those guys love that. You know, Draymond loves walking into a road building with, you know, the proverbial, you know, going back to the old Western movie cliche, the black hat on, you know, as the bad guy. So he loves that role. So I do think that's going to play well for the Warriors because, just as you pointed out, I mean, last year that Boston crowd was not only going nuts, but they were, you know, they also added a little of their own, how should we say, distinct flavor to it. So.
Well, Tim, here's hoping for a bunch of your highlights, man. We're really, really looking forward to this, and can't wait to hear how it sounds. And there's nobody better to bring it to all of us than you, man. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I'm lucky in this regard, guys. I'm lucky, obviously, to work for the Warriors and work for a fan base and the ownership group that are just the best. But in this case, in this playoff series, I'm really lucky because I know that energy will not be required for me. It will be brought to me by the crowds in both of these buildings. I'm looking forward to this. It's been a long time coming, and I think it's going to be a blast.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Tim, awesome, man. Thanks for doing it.
My pleasure.
All right, there goes Tim Roye.